Spring is in the air at Global Voice Broadcasting. Fresh new shows are hitting the airwaves every day. Shows about all the things that matter to you in your life. Music, fashion, celebs, and more. It's all here, and it's getting better every day. Only at Global Voice Broadcasting.
I highly recommend Ms. Hicks. Her books, her CDs are encouraging.
I bought her book, A Hill to Climb. She's a very inspirational speaker.
And I look forward to one day being able to work with her.
Your power lies within you. Let it loose.
Aspiration, inspiration, motivation, edification, determination. These are the keys of life success, brought to you by none other than award-winning author, motivational lecturer, business consultant, and much more as she gets you aimed to your purpose. And now, ladies and gentlemen, young and elder, from Hollywood to the entire world, here is your host of Aim to Purpose, the radio show, Louise Hicks, along with her co-host, yours truly, Kennon Wesley Mason.
How is everybody today? And welcome to Aim to Purpose, the radio show. I am your host, Louise Hicks.
And I am your co-host, Kennon Mason. And as always, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone listening and watching Aim to Purpose, the radio show from all over the world. We welcome you, and we welcome all the new listeners from around the world tuning in as we bring you another special edition on this April 11th of 2016. And as always, you can call in from anywhere around the world, 1-323-522-5482 from anywhere around the world, 1-323-522-5482, as our special topic today is the destruction of liberty in America, enforced psychiatric treatment and mental health, with our special in-studio guest today, Mr. Gary S. Brown.
And we have a great show, and we always love having our in-studio guests. So we have attorney Gary S. Brown with us today, Ken just mentioned, to discuss a topic that's very dear to my heart, because as you all know that have been listening to the radio show, I have a son who is part of this mental health broken system that I call severely broken because of all the challenges I've faced with it. And you saw that riveting video at the beginning of the show, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that video. But first, we're going to talk about some hot topics and what's going on in the news. And I tell you, it's been hot, it's heating up even more, and as summer comes on, it's probably going to heat up even more. And I don't know whether you all have heard about this new twist in the Vaxxed documentary. And this documentary, Vaxxed, from cover-up to catastrophe, was pulled from the Tribeca Film Festival, and now we hear it's been pulled from another film festival out in Houston, Texas, called the WordFest Houston International Film and Video Festival. And we heard it was just pulled from that festival last week, and it was pulled by a government official. That's what's so stunning about it. It was pulled by the mayor of Houston.
The mayor of Houston, yes.
And,
his name is Sylvester Turner.
Right, Sylvester Turner. And you want to talk a little bit about that, Ken, and share with our audience what you know about it thus far?
Well, I mean, the only thing I can say is that here we go again with more censorship, and the more you hear about the censorship of this particular documentary, the more it seems to get the attention of the people in a positive way. The more they try to censor it, the more people want to watch.
Oh yeah, and the plot just thickens because it's a professor out of the University of Houston, a law professor, in fact. It is alleged that this law professor has said that this is a violation of the First Amendment and the freedom of speech when the government is getting involved in pulling films from the film festival. And there's going to be, from what I understand, some protests out in Houston, Texas as a result of this, and people are just fed up, and you can't blame them, because I, for one, am fed up with all of this. And it kind of plays into what we're talking about today, because we know all of these psychotropic drugs come through the pharmaceutical industry and the drug industry, just as the vaccines do. So we're going to be talking about that. And the interesting part about this Houston situation is that it is reported that the wife of a county official is involved in Houston's censorship of the vaccine industry and has close ties to one of the vaccine producers, according to what is being reported now. So, and that's a judge by the name of Ed Emmett, and his wife's name is Gwen.
Yes.
And that's being reported. So it's really getting more intense, and it causes one to really wonder, what do they have to hide? And I know this movie is coming to Los Angeles, and you need to log on and Google Vaxxed from cover up to catastrophe so that you can go see it, because it should be coming to Los Angeles, from what I understand, this week. And I, for one, will be going to see it.
Well, and another thing is the documentary itself. Most of the attention has been going to further demonize Dr. Andrew Wakefield, but the documentary itself isn't about him. It's about the whistleblower that came forward from the Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Thompson.
Right, Dr. William Thompson.
And Dr. William Thompson. And the documentary is about what he's revealed about the patterns that kind of bring together vaccines and the development of autism in children. And he did this study on young black children in the Atlanta, Georgia area. And all of this has come forward now, and Dr. Wakefield decided to bring all this research to the people now. So, and the government, as you can see, has gone on their usual tirade of giving negative press to information that could be really important to the people that have autistic children.
And when the government attempts to hide something from you through the CDC, which is a government establishment or entity, if you will, I mean, it's something to wonder about. Why are they hiding these things from us? So it's something you should want to go to see. And one other thing I want to bring to your attention, and then we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back and introduce our guest and talk about our topic for today, which is the destruction of liberty in America, enforced psychiatric treatment, and mental health. And, I mean, we'll find out more about what that means, but there is another documentary that's coming on starting tomorrow, and it's a 9 docu-series, and it starts, as I say, tomorrow, April 12th, and the title is The Truth About Cancer, A Global Quest, and you might want to tune into this, and so you can find out that there are options and alternatives to the conventional ways of handling cancer, which usually is chemotherapy. And there are other ways. In fact, there's it talks about preventing and beating cancer, and they're going global all over the world.
Yeah.
That they're talking to doctors and nurses, and these people have done proof. They have proved that many cancers can be cured without the traditional chemotherapy and all of what they're using to make money with these drugs. So,
well, and they also interview the actual people that have cured themselves, not just the doctors or the nurses, but the people themselves that have they made a decision to go this way instead of going the way that our medical establishment has told us that is the way for the last 42 years, since Richard Nixon said we have a war on cancer.
And that war has been going on too long and too much money, and they still haven't found. In fact, more people have cancer now than they had when they started the war on cancer. So how is it a war on cancer? So to find out how to view that series, you go to this website, which is go.thetruthAboutCancer, and that's all one word, thetruthaboutcancer.com. That's go.thetruthAboutCancer.com. And with that being said, I want to let you know that I'm dedicating this show today to my son David, who celebrates his 35th birthday. And as you all know that have been listening to the show, my son and I have been battling the mental health system and the medical industry for 20 years now. And the last 10 years, it has been, I would call, just an atrocity to us. So I'm so happy that we have our special guest, attorney Gary S. Brown, who will shed some light on the destruction of liberty in America, enforced psychiatric treatment and mental health. And I dedicate this show again to my son, David. Happy 35th birthday. And we've had a lot of struggles. So with that said, we're going to go to a break.
I want to say something real quick before we get to our guests and go to a commercial break. I just want to say to my brother, David, I know he's not watching right now, but he may watch this in the future, and I just want to say on a very personal note that I know that we've had our differences along this journey that you've taken, but know that I do love you, and I do want you to get well, and one day, my hope is that we can come together as we once were, once upon a time, and live out our lives as brother and brother. So I dedicate this personally to you, David Reed II. And on that note, we're going to come back, Aim to Purpose, the radio show, with our special guest, attorney at law and mental health advocate, Gary S. Brown. Don't you go nowhere. Hello, world. It's a new year, which means new and live editions of Aim to Purpose, the radio show. We'll be sharing new ideas with new guests from around the world, revealing new truths with every new topic presented to you, the A2P universe. So tune in every Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, right here at Global Voice Broadcasting at gvbstudios.com/show/A2P. You can also check out all of our archive shows on YouTube by typing in Aim to Purpose Radio. A special thank you to all the loyal viewers that have been with us from the beginning, and a big welcome and thank you to all the new viewers plugging into the A2P universe. Your power lies within you, so let it loose. Once again, this is Kennon Wesley Mason, co-host of Aim to Purpose, the radio show.
Hello, world. Once again, we are back, and as I said, I'm your host, Louise Hicks, along with my son and co-host, Kennon Wesley Mason. And now we're going to go ahead and introduce our special guest in studio.
Yes, Gary S. Brown has been practicing law for nearly 45 years. He has an AV rating by Martindale-Hubbell, which is the oldest rating group of lawyers in America, and AV is the highest rating offered. His practice areas are involuntary commitments in psychiatry, civil rights, business development and business litigation, personal injury, real estate, and construction defects. He's a board-certified civil trial specialist by the National Board of Trial Advocates and a fellow of the American College of Board-Certified Attorneys. He's a retired certified public accountant. His training included a BS in accounting and MS in accounting and a JD, all from UCLA. He speaks of the destruction of liberty in America due to the use of enforced psychiatric treatment. He says people have a right to say no, and before they can exercise that right, must understand the distortion that has arisen over time in the name of mental health. Let's give a warm, Aim to Purpose welcome, in-studio guest, Mr. Gary S. Brown.
Thank you, and welcome, Gary, to the show, and thank you for coming in with your bow tie on. Love that bow tie.
Professional. I love
it. Thank you.
Sharing this day with us, and as I mentioned,
what a day to be here.
We really appreciate it, and we're going to shed some light on what's going on, because we know that there's a lot going on in the psychiatry industry, as we saw that video at the top of the show. Did you want to elaborate on that video and say anything about that? Because it was a very powerful, riveting video.
Well, the Citizens Commission on Human Rights has been around for years, and it was formed with a very, very intelligent psychiatrist by the name of Thomas Szasz back in the late 1960s. And ever since then, it has endeavored to carefully and thoroughly study the area and report it accurately. And what it does is it presents information that's controversial that usually gets squashed in the public media, because people who pay money, called sponsors, don't want to pay for things said bad about them.
That's right.
And the pharmaceutical companies have a lot of money to make selling their drugs, for example.
Yes.
But everything that's said in that video is not only impactful, but it's accurate and based upon a lot of study. So I appreciate that they do this hard work, and they do it continuously to tell the truth. That's their mission, tell the truth. And that brings me to the next thought, if I could.
Yes.
A while back, I ran into a really smart psychologist, of all things, a very smart man named Gerd Gigerenzer. I got to spell it, Gigerenzer, who wrote a book called Risk Savvy, How to Make Good Decisions. And what he was communicating is that in order to make a good decision, you need a lot of accurate data to think with. That you can't simply rely upon one good friend or one quick newspaper article. You've got to look into the area carefully. And I was very impressed with his book and the way he presented it so thoroughly. And I was very impressed with the fact that he was in a field that is interested in helping people heal. And if we go back to the roots of civilization, it was Hippocrates who said, you know, when people are upset, it's not because of the gods, it's because of something in their central nervous system. And interestingly enough, as I did some special research yesterday to kind of hone in on things for today, I noticed that the definition of psychiatry had to deal with healing the soul. And it talked about being able to handle and heal the central nervous system. But I've been working in the area of helping people avoid enforced psychiatry, which I'll talk about in a moment. And I've never once heard somebody practicing psychiatry talk about healing the soul.
I haven't either.
And I've never once talked about anybody in the field of psychiatry talking about healing the central nervous system.
Wow.
And interestingly, the opposite. They give these drugs, pharmaceutical, approved drugs, that actually disturb people very, very badly. And so what I want to get to the root of today is two things. I want people to appreciate that when government gets involved and forces people to use psychiatry, something has gone very, very wrong. And it's a destruction of liberty to do that. And I want to talk about that briefly.
Absolutely.
And I want to help people understand they can say no legally and properly and effectively say no. And I also want to tell them that this is a very complicated subject. So I know a friend of mine and I are going to be offering a lot more seminars under the auspices of CCHR, that's the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. And we haven't set specific dates yet, but at the end of the show, I'll give people an address and a telephone number. But to start with, what I want to point out is this. When people become familiar with certain words, they think they mean something. Now, that may sound a little bit odd, but everybody has heard the term mental health. But nobody can tell you what it means. Everybody has heard the word mental. And my most interesting encounter when I'm working in court settings or even other places is asking a person who is advocating that a person be held in an institution, I ask them what a disorder is. And then I ask them, well, if there's a disorder, you must have some idea of how to put in order. What is orderly?
Disorder versus orderly.
And they can't, and I'm not trying to play clever word games.
Of course.
I'm trying to point out a very fundamental idea. We become intimidated when somebody suggests that our mind is not working okay. And everybody I've ever worked with gets very upset when they are both captured and told that their mind is not working okay. And I hope, if anything, to communicate with the audience tonight that it isn't correct to tell a person their mind isn't working okay, because there's nobody actually with the expertise to make such a dramatic statement.
Or the proof that, or because, for example, you can't see mental illness in an X-ray. You know, you can't see those type of things in a blood test. You can't diagnose schizophrenia through a urine sample. So they always, in advertising, they always tell you to go ask your doctor for this because, you know, we're cuckoo somehow. That's how it's spun.
But let's go back. Exactly right. Let's go back a bit. First of all, the word illness. It's very interesting. If you take the time to look up the word illness, you know what it meant a long time ago?
What did it?
Bad moral character. Now,
Illness.
Holy smokes, folks.
Illness.
And no wonder they tag that on to mental. But as you're correctly saying, there's no pathology. Pathology means, can you see it in the human tissue? Can you see it in a cell? Can you see it on an x-ray and so forth? Now, obviously, there are sad situations where somebody has a growth, a tumor, what have you, but I'm leaving that out. I'm talking about regular human experience where somebody gets upset. And let me talk to you about the simple stuff that happens in life that gets classified as a mental disorder. A child goes to school and is given an assignment to write a creative essay. True story. I'm not going to make up a single story.
Absolutely.
She writes a creative essay, and the teacher reads it and decides that she has a desire to hurt herself. She actually wrote an interpretation of a movie she had seen the day before.
Oh my God.
That led to her being taken to a psychiatric hospital and held involuntarily for a few days. That's how bizarre it can get.
That is bizarre.
Okay. Or a young boy, and this was an extreme tragic story, a young boy felt his family didn't love him anymore. And his dramatic expression was to try to hurt himself. And after I talked to him and I talked to his family, I was finally able to explain to the hospital what he was going through and that he had changed his mind, and they finally let him go. Or an old man who felt his family didn't love him anymore, and he took too many pills one day. And he got taken to a psychiatric hospital to be held, and we had a hearing, and we explained to the hearing officer what happened and that he had changed his mind and his family was there to love him, and they let him go. Now, the point is, those are some simple examples. And let me give you some more that are really more obvious. I've been to one particular institution in Los Angeles that holds children in it. And I was there on behalf of a 5-year-old child who was taken out of class, supposedly dangerous, and locked up in a psychiatric hospital. And when I got there, I watched children lined up being ordered to march, in effect. They were ordered to walk in line by armed guards. And I looked at this, and it bothered me of some memories of some very unpleasant times earlier in history. And I went in to advocate for this young child, and he was released. Now, the point is, I want to explain something about the involuntary commitment laws, at least as they are in California, and I have found them to be substantially similar all over the nation whenever other laws are brought to my attention. In California, before a person can be involuntarily locked up in a psychiatric institution, somebody has to explain clearly in writing, I mean in writing, by pointing to conduct that they've engaged in, not personal opinions and attitudes, that the person is dangerous to themselves or dangerous to somebody else, to others. The third category is gravely disabled. I'm going to postpone that for a moment. Now, what does dangerous mean? Well, we commonly think of it as, and the law says, imparting a serious injury. Okay, but how do we figure that out before it happens? So let me jump over to another area of the law that we're more familiar with. And that's called the criminal law. And we have something in the criminal law called an assault. And an assault is when somebody has almost done something to touch. They're threatening to touch, and I'm keeping this simple. And they have to have the capacity to do it. And the person listening has to really believe it. And I'm giving it to you in very, very simple terms. Well, when we come back over into the mental area where we think we're being kind to our society, we get more vague. And we now confuse it this way. We have a child or a young adult or an older adult who has been in a close relationship with a member of the other sex, or nowadays could be the same gender. That isn't the issue. They have a strong personal bond with somebody.
Right.
And that relationship breaks up. And the first thing that happens is they get very unhappy.
Of course.
Oh, yeah.
Now, what they say depends upon what they consider to be drama. And if they say, I want to die, they're likely to get locked up in a psychiatric hospital.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And yet, how many times has it happened that somebody makes a dramatic remark about an upsetting situation involving a personal relationship and then gets over it in a short amount of time?
Because that's human nature to do that, though, right? And also, now, how does this destruction, what does it mean first, and how does that tie in to, you've given a lot of examples here of what has happened and how this destruction of liberty in America, how did that come into play with the mental health and us getting, like you said, we make these statements and the next thing we know, we're locked up.
Right. And here's how it works, Louise. That's exactly where I want to take this. The point is that the law says that you can control conduct. And when Thomas Jefferson helped form this country, and there are many quotes of Thomas Jefferson, but specifically when he was talking in front of the Virginia legislature, he explained that the legitimate role of government is to control conduct, not thinking. And
That's a great point. I like that. To control your conduct, not thinking.
That's right. And our First Amendment, which is cherished, isn't always appreciated in its full sense. Because for me, I've spent years in courthouses. And one of the things I noticed for many, many years in Los Angeles is that a lot of people hang out around a courthouse. And not all of them are your model citizens. Some of them are not doing so well. But we never think of capturing them. They're simply there. And they might be speaking differently. They might be not making sense. But we're not going to bother them. Or if we go down to the beaches in Venice, California, where different cultures live, we're going to meet a lot of people who think differently and express themselves differently.
Cultural differences.
It's very eclectic.
And some of them may be tripping out on stuff that we don't formally approve of, but it happens.
Right.
We don't think of capturing them because of their odd thinking or their odd words.
Right.
So the law is looking for conduct, not words. And yet what has happened is the use of words has translated into an interpretation and a prediction of future bad conduct.
Right.
And yet, the interesting thing, and I'll tell you how it came to mind so it all makes sense. Back in the 70s and 80s, a lot of hard-working, sincere, civil rights-oriented lawyers were very concerned about what police could do on the street and who could they stop and who could they make talk to them. And when they stopped them, what could they do to that person while they were talking to them? All these rules about stop and frisk, detentions versus arrests, all became a very important controversy in our country because we cherish freedom.
Right.
We cherish liberty. We cherish the fact that you shouldn't be chilled when you walk around in life. You shouldn't have to be, so to speak, looking over your shoulder, wondering when you're going to get in trouble. You should be free to be yourself, speak your mind.
That's right.
But now we have this new branch called mental health in the name of I'm going to help you. And I submit to you, anytime the government says, I want to help you, be careful, be wary, don't trust it. A very famous Supreme Court justice said that from New York. Don't trust the government when they say, I want to help you. And now we have a group of people who have to predict the danger from the words. And yet when the police incidents were occurring, the psychiatrists then were attacked for not bringing to the public's attention people they were counseling who might be dangerous. And they properly said, hey, you can't make us talk about secret communication. In other words, physician-patient privileged communication. And moreover, we can't predict violence. We don't know whether words mean a person's going to do it.
Right.
And all those publications are already out. And if you look now on the internet, you will see some very candid law review articles, articles by physicians, articles by psychologists explaining that they cannot predict conduct from words. And yet in the mental health law, that's exactly what they're being asked to do.
So
and if they would simply stop doing that, if they would restore their integrity and say, look, you may have said in your statute that we're supposed to do that job, but we really can't. Stop forcing us to pretend that we can do something that we can't do. We would start to get this straightened out. And I can explain that a lot more, but it's hard at this one moment.
But I'm understanding it now, the destruction, how this came about, the destruction of the liberty. Now, is there a difference between liberty and freedom?
In my opinion, I've done a lot of research in this area, and I've had some interesting debates, and here's the way I see it. Liberty is the unfettered ability to be yourself. And freedom is the ultimate compromise we make as a social order about what's okay and what's not okay, granting the most freedom, the most liberty we can grant. Obviously, when we get together in a room and we decide to have a meal together, we're going to have to choose food.
Right.
We're going to have to have some discussions and have some compromises. When we live in a community, we're going to have to make some rules. Obviously, one person's decision to act a particular way may not be okay with the rest of the group.
True.
And fortunately, in this country, and it's a great country with, I think, only 5% of the land mass occupied, you got places to go if you want to be different. And the question is, how much difference can we tolerate and accept? We learn to tolerate a great deal of difference. But in this area of these laws, and in California it's called the Lanterman-Petrie-Short Act.
Right.
This is the evolution of the insanity laws in California. I'm telling you that in 1897, California had an insanity law, and that in 1903 the Supreme Court said that because of the procedure it wasn't constitutional, and they basically shut it down. But over time, California has developed laws, and legislators are smart, but keep in mind they're not trained in this area, so they're subject to influences, but they're still not trained themselves.
Right.
And here we come up with the model law in the nation, and as I look at it, it is deeply, seriously flawed. And I'll give you two fundamental reasons.
That's that 1967
Lanterman.
Right, the names of the people that came about, I guess.
Yeah, these were three famous legislators.
My son and I talked to the legislators about this act. When I found out about it, I started looking it up. Now, does that apply to California, or is that a national?
It's a California law.
It's a California law.
If you talk to anybody in California who works in this area, you're going to hear the words LPS and LPS Act. And that's the Lanterman-Petrie-Short Act.
I started learning about it.
If you talk to people that love numbers and code names, you're going to hear about the Welfare and Institutions Code 5150 hold.
Right.
And that derives from the fact that the Lanterman-Petrie-Short Act starts at Welfare and Institutions Code Section 5000 and continues. And so the point is that we have two very fundamental flaws that we're imposing on the public.
Right.
We're allowing the government, the people of the United States and the people of California are allowing the government to make choices about when to lock a person up because of the apparency of their thoughts causing them to be a problem regarding violence. And they really can't link it together well. But in fact, the way the process unfolds, people don't know their rights. They don't know when to speak up or who to ask for help. So the process runs itself. It's, you walk into any government office and they'll tell you how they do things. But if you happen to know the law, you might say, no, that's not okay. And so what I want to talk about a little bit is disagreeing and the legal right to disagree.
But when you disagree with them, like I've run into it with my son, they don't respond back to you. I've run into it with Senator Feinstein, the U.S. Senator Feinstein, with Tony Mendoza, the California senator. I mean, the supervisors, Kanabi, Supervisor Antonovich, and these people won't even respond back to you. Do they know about this law in California? Because we do live here, and this is the problem I'm having with my son.
They won't.
Elaborate
I promise
on
you,
that some more, please.
I haven't met those individuals specifically, but I can make a general statement from 30 years in this area, operating in this area. Most of the people operating in this area don't really understand the law and really don't think about liberty interests and civil rights. And they're thinking in different thoughts, different models, if I can use that. And so what they're doing is they learn their job and they learn the routines of their job and they do it and they learn to be pushy. And most people who've been involved in this system, and I have helped hundreds and hundreds of people, they all tell me one thing for sure. They all felt pushed around. And so, and when they don't know what to do and what to say, they're going to feel pushed around. And even when they assert their proper rights, they may feel pushed around. I had an example only 2, 3, 4 weeks ago where I was called in and I met a lovely father who loved his son, who was captured and being held at a very well-known psychiatric ward in Los Angeles. And all of a sudden, during the telephone call, I was on the call with him, a woman barged into the room and she said, "I'm a patient's rights advocate and I'm here to give information to you." And I said, "Well, Mr. So-and-so," I'm not going to use names. I said, "You're going to have a choice now. You're going to be offered a patient's rights advocate who's hired by the County of Los Angeles and answers to the County of Los Angeles and works in the system every day. And she may give you information that tends to agree with what they're doing. Or I can give you counsel and you may find me not agreeing with what they're doing. But you're going to have to make the choice. You're free to make that choice. You have a choice between a patient's rights advocate and an attorney."
Let me ask you this, Gary. Is that a conflict? Because I've run into all of this stuff, but I didn't know my legal rights. And I'm so glad I ran into you, because is that a conflict of interest? And I worked for the County of Los Angeles for 32 years, and I know the corruption that goes on in there, and because I've had to fight them myself and proved it myself. But is that a conflict of interest to have these patient advocates who work for the county? How are you going to get justice and fairness and be able to say no, like we are learning now that we have a right to say no from you? Because I didn't know all this. Isn't that a conflict of interest?
No, let me sort this out a little bit. I get the passion of your question and the meaning in your message, but let me sort this out. The County of Los Angeles has a lot of responsibilities to its citizens, and it has to design systems that really work. I am a bit critical of the patients' rights advocates. I don't think they're well trained, and I don't think they have the confidence to be sufficiently independent to be strong advocates. But let me point out to you that the same county provides you with prosecutors to prosecute criminals, provides you with judges to judge criminal law cases and civil cases, and provides you with public defenders to provide what I consider to be very decent legal work, even though many in the public are a bit critical of them.
Right.
My point is we have to figure out what each job is for and whether they're being properly trained and whether they really understand their positions.
Okay.
But let me go on just a little farther and it'll make a little more sense. When we talk about upset human beings, and allow me to use the word upset instead of this mental health button that everybody's kind of thinks they understand, but they don't. Upset human beings stir up everybody. And so your public defender and your prosecutor and your judge, being human, also have susceptibility to become a little bit confused in this area. So sorting it out is going to take a lot of intelligent interaction. I can't get through all that today.
Of course, we're going to have you back.
But what I can say to you for sure is that people need to understand that the people working in the system do make a lot of mistakes.
Okay.
And that the system needs to be either fixed or completely changed. I submit it has to be completely changed. But let's start off with fixing it so that it works the way it's supposed to work. And that means a person has to have and understand that they have a right to say no. And let me explain a couple of times when they should say no. When you're out in the field and you're talking to somebody who's interviewing you to decide whether or not they're going to lock you up for being dangerous because you don't think straight, you know, you're dangerous because of a mental disorder, you can decide not to talk to them.
Right.
There is no compulsion to speak with these people. Of course, it's kind of hard to ask a person who's that upset to exercise that kind of judgment. So let's move along, okay? Let's assume the person is very upset and the person in the field thinks that they should be subjected to a psychiatric confinement.
And that's that 5150,
5150.
The hold for 3 days, 72 hours.
Yeah. Now, when they get to the front door of the hospital has an independent duty to determine whether that person has the legal characteristics, and then they later decide whether they have the mental characteristics to be involuntarily confined. Let me tell you what that means. It means at the front door of the hospital, they have to figure out whether the application has words in it pointing to conduct that makes it clear that that person is dangerous or gravely disabled. They unfortunately don't understand their own law, and they assume that if the police brought you to the door, they got to take you in. Or if a social worker brought you to the door, they got to take you in. So we got to be aware of that big mistake that's going on, and I'm challenging it now a bit in the courts because nobody has before. Now when you come through the door, the hospital has a preliminary evaluation to determine whether the person isn't thinking straight, whether they have a mental disorder. It's really challenging because any psychiatrist will tell you that you got to do what any psychiatrist really can't do, is figure out a person's mind in a very, very quick amount of time, and they don't have any records.
But the psychiatrists, not there, you're saying they have to determine, they're not doing the initial screening up front. You don't get to see the psychiatrist when you first go in there. You're by a nurse or somebody.
According to the law, sorry to step on your question, according to the law, the hospital has to, hospitals first of all have to be what's called designated. They're chosen by the county. They have to go through an application. They have to go through training. They have to go through certain promises. It's very rigorous. Now, once the hospital is designated, the hospital has to employ individuals who are designated.
And trained.
And that means they have to be trained in the law. And Los Angeles County has a terrific manual to teach people. It's just people don't understand it and follow it. And
True.
and that's the big...
I've encountered it.
That's the big flaw. So the hospital is under a legal duty when you come to their front door to put a designated person in the room with the prospective patient and figure out whether they have the legal characteristics to keep them against their will.
Okay.
So they have to find two legal characteristics. One is their state of mind, which is the first time anybody with qualifications is going to try to do this. And the second is, are they dangerous or gravely disabled? They can't skip that
step. What does
step.
Gravely disabled actually mean? And we're going to skip we have another commercial. We're going to skip it because I want to get through and
I will
through
explain
some
that.
of this. Yeah, explain that, what that means.
It means, and it's the only term that is defined in the statute specifically, it says that the person is unable, because of their state of mind, to take care of their housing, their food, or their health needs. But the Supreme Court in 1975 said, but if they have a family member or a friend who can help them do it, then you can't hold them. So gravely disabled, and I'm simplifying it, gravely disabled disappears when a family member or friend who's honestly qualified steps forward, and in California it's got to be in writing and says, I'll take care of this person. And then we got other options we can talk about.
Now,
but again,
is that
I got to
different
keep
than
it.
conservatorship? Because we
Yes.
want to come back and talk about that too in another show.
You know, absolutely.
So
Thank
that's
you.
different.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do it another time, because that's a
Right.
big subject.
Okay, right. So
But that is a way
that's
to help a
different.
person with court authority.
Right.
But the offer to help a person in writing is what can be used to eliminate the threat of the
I
gravely
see.
disabled category. So therefore, the psychiatrist is faced with the dilemma of trying to figure out whether a person is dangerous. Now, if they didn't use a deadly instrument on themselves or somebody else, and they used only words, and the psychiatrists have consistently said we can't predict conduct from words, then they have no legitimate right to capture people based upon what they said. And I want to make that point loud and clear, because people have to object. Now, what does object mean? It doesn't mean you fight with your captor, because you'll be in trouble. You know,
Right.
I used to explain this to kids years ago. The policeman with a gun and a billy club is going to hurt you if you give him a hard time or her a hard time. So don't get physically violent and don't get nasty with your mouth, but understand they're making a mistake, and you especially want to mentally note that so you can tell your helper, preferably a lawyer, which could be a public defender or a private lawyer who knows what they're doing, and there aren't
And
that
can they
many.
force you to take the drugs then?
No,
These-
no. We'll get there. Drugs are a whole nother story. Give me a moment to explain. In California, the California Supreme Court has respectfully said that drugs that impact the mind, called psychoactive or psychotropic drugs, are very difficult to respond to, and that a person has an absolute right to say no to them unless a court orders it. And that's a very limited circumstance. And the basic law in California for all physicians, and a psychiatrist is primarily a physician, and I can get into that in a moment, but a psychiatrist is a physician who has to follow the rules of practicing medicine. And that means they are fundamentally a consultant. Now, it's one you didn't choose. Here's a physician, and notice I don't use the word doctor, and I'll explain that. Here's a physician you didn't choose who wants to do something to you that you don't want to do. What are your rights? And the first thing is you may decide you don't want to talk to him. Because what can he do in his field without a conversation? Think on that for a bit, okay?
That's right.
So I often make a joke, and I hope this can be understood, that even a fish won't get in trouble if it knows when to keep its mouth shut.
Right.
So there are times when you don't want to talk. But you don't have a Miranda warning in this area.
Miranda warning, what is that?
That's the warning when a person is suspected of a crime and they're warned that they have a right to a lawyer, they have a right to remain
Miranda
silent.
rights. Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah, that was the 1967 Supreme Court case
So
where...
what's the difference between a doctor and a physician then? Is there a difference?
Well, the word doctor is actually a theosophical term. If you go back and look at it, it means a learned one.
Yeah.
And if you go back and look at the origin of the word, it refers to somebody who has or possesses a great deal of special knowledge.
Yeah.
And we bestow that on people from the clergy. We bestow that upon people who have studied areas or fields where we respect them. And it can be in the field of physics and mathematics and English and theosophy and philosophy. And certainly somebody who goes through a medical college and finishes a medical college has earned a medical doctorate degree and is entitled to be referred to as a doctor. However, the public hasn't stopped to think about what they mean when they're using this honorary term, when they're referring to somebody, and it's got them into the viewpoint that they listen and therefore they must obey or follow every single thought that's being offered to them. And I'm saying in the field of psychiatry, I would be a lot more inquisitive and ask a lot more questions, like how do you know that and what studies prove that? Right. And, you know, are there other forms of therapy? In California, we have a primary rule called informed consent, and it's adopted by the American Psychiatric Association, by the physicians in America. It means that a patient is in charge of their own health and their own destiny, and that the physician is a consultant. And the consultant is supposed to teach you. They got to figure out what they think you can learn, and then they got to explain it to you in words they think you'll understand, and then you get to make a choice. They don't give you an order. You ever heard of doctor's orders?
Doctor's orders, yes.
Hello, somebody.
Yes, yes.
Let's stop and think about that again.
Yes.
Now, I mind you, I have worked with physicians that I have great respect for, and I tend to agree with them because they're smarter than I am. But it's only after I do a little bit of look on the internet, my iPad being my favorite tool, and I encourage other people, do some look on the internet and see if you find some contrary ideas, because you don't have to go along with the suggestion. Informed consent means what it says, but it is misused constantly. It is misused by intimidating people.
Right.
They're cornered.
Bullying them.
That's right.
They're cornered. They're frightened. They don't know they have a right to say no.
Right.
And the first thing is I want people to think of, you have a right to say no. You have a right to ask for legal help. Whether you're going to choose
Well, I think
an
it's
advocate.
a money issue with people with legal help. I mean, the average person just doesn't have the money sometimes.
That's why we have the public defender's
to get.
office.
Right, but a lot of people don't even know about that. That's why education is so important.
Yes.
To find out they have public defenders that can help you to get through this. Some people they're not aware of all this.
To Louise, to some extent. Unfortunately, public defenders, as good as they are, as much as I do admire them, have come up as citizens in America. They have come up with the idea that psychiatry is a branch of medicine, that it's authentic, that you should listen to it. They come up with the idea that the medications are helpful, and in earnest, they've been busy learning how to practice law, and so they think this field of psychiatry is something they should pay attention to and give deference to. They haven't had anybody intelligent discuss it with them. They don't know how to challenge it. Right. So
that's why we need so much reform, and that's why we're going to have you to come back, because this is a huge subject with, like we saw in the film, what's going on, how people are dying as a result of these drugs. So, and
the important point with this, and you mentioned earlier vaccines, and I don't mean to cross over, but we need intelligent public discussion. We have an intelligent population that is capable of figuring things out when the information is flowing openly and honestly. When it gets chopped off, when it gets summarized improperly, unfortunately, when any group that has more influence over how it's said gets in control, we end up with the terrible results we have now, and we force people improperly into institutions for being human, and we make them act a certain way and behave a certain way, and we influence them to take drugs which hurt them, and all of this destroys the liberty of a nation. And common to all of the unrest that is going on in America, and I'm not leaving out any of it, I'm respecting all the civil unrest in America, whether it be called racial unrest or religious unrest or political unrest. Underneath all that is, how do we handle being alive as a human? How do we handle upsets? And can we allow the government to force us into a style of remedy, a way of solving upsets when they really don't know how, and they're using methods that really hurt people? And I object to that strenuously, and I want people to know more about it.
So do I, and that's why we had you in, and that's why we want you to come back, because people don't understand what our rights are. I know I've been going through this for 20 years now, and with my son, and I'm just learning and waking up through doing research on my own and making the public aware of a lot of these things, and they don't want us to know. And you said it when you said about the public, the interest of the people that don't want us to know. And we know that the pharmaceutical industry, the drug industry, those may be trillion-dollar industries now. I know they were multi-billion-dollar industries, but it's really come to down to it when we have to educate. And I know we have to wrap it up, so you could give us a final thought, and can you come back and tell us a little bit about these classes? And we gotta
we're going to be holding seminars at a community center at 8039 South Vermont Avenue in Los Angeles, and the phone number to reach that center is 323-419-8230. And these seminars will unfold, and the first of them will be about the fact that psychiatry cannot predict violence. And because they can't predict violence, they're being put in an impossible position when they're being asked to determine whether people are dangerous. And unfortunately, they have yielded to certain pressures also in the wrong way. And I also will want to point out in some of the seminars many other ways that people are impacted. I mean, we haven't even gotten close to many other things that are common experiences in life where people have to say no. And the most important thing is, if you're captured, a family person is captured, you need expert legal help fast, and you must ask for the right to go to court. You must ask for it. They won't give it to you unless you ask for it.
That's right.
And the only thing they'll give you are little bitty hearings that I refer to as kangaroo hearings. If anybody knows
court,
that,
yes.
anybody knows that. I'm being disrespectful of them, but I think I'm entitled to, having been through so many.
And you need a qualified attorney,
You've got to go,
that knows about this mental health system.
And very few do, but you can get help from the public defender's office. They will make them follow the law, but they won't understand where psychiatry is exceeding the law. And that's why CCHR is so important, to go there and look at their videos, look at their books, and begin to become educated on what's wrong with psychiatry, because there's so much wrong with it.
It's a lot wrong with it, and I can attest to that. And the CCHR is the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. And I know with my son, they've been very helpful. It's and that address again is 8039 South Vermont. The phone number is 323-419-8230.
And that's the Scientology Community Center. Just to wrap up, I know that the topic is the destruction of liberty in America, and we've already seen the destruction of liberties with SB 277 going into law here in California, where there's a mandate for forced vaccinations. If you don't do it, you're not going to have your children in public or private schools. And now we're seeing it here with the synthetic psychotropic drugs that are designed to suppress human emotion. The DSM book has grown out of control over the last 30, 40 years.
Yes,
and with every single emotion that we have being labeled as an illness or disease or disorder now.
And Gary has really explained that, how this is destroying and destructing our liberty, because the government is dictating to us. And I like that. I'm glad I understand better now about the conduct of versus not thinking, how they have just taken over our thinking, it seems to me.
Well, that's what the advertising does. It's made to control the way we think about ourselves. If you're feeling this way, ask your doctor for that drug. If you're feeling this way, ask about that drug. And we see what the results have been.
Yes,
and my brother is a perfect example.
Perfect example. And that's why I dedicated this show to my son, David, today, whom I love dearly. And without my intervention and fighting with the system and going through all the stuff, and I'm glad I'm learning more now. I've learned a lot from Gary through meeting him, and that's why I wanted him to come on the show, and I want you to come back. So will you come back?
My pleasure.
And
absolutely.
we can talk some more about this, because this is a subject that needs to be exposed more, this psychiatric industry, where it seems to be drug-driven as opposed to patient-driven. So you want to say a final thought, and then we're going to wrap it up, Gary.
Yes. One of the things that we do at the Citizens Commission for Human Rights is we document abuse cases, because many people have had horrible experiences, but they haven't been carefully written up. So when we want to go complain about it to our government, they think we're speaking in generalities. So if you've had that kind of an experience, we want you to contact the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. And if you're willing to help us, please imagine what it's like to have thousands and thousands of abuse cases and not have enough people to do the interviews. So we would so appreciate your help. And then we'll have facts to present to an intelligent public upon which they can make decisions. Thank you very much.
And that number again, would that be the 323
Yes.
number? That
Yes.
number is 323-419-8230 to contact if you want to follow through with what Gary has
Either
just
with a
spoken
complaint or you want to help. We desperately need help, and we very much want to hear your complaints.
Absolutely.
Yes. And please do. And with that being said, we're going to wrap it up. We'll have Gary back.
Yes.
We thank you for coming in to give us this information. I tell you, it's well needed. And I want to wish my son a happy birthday again. And I'm really blessed that I found out about the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, because they've helped me a lot to steer me in the right direction. They helped my son, David. So with that said, until next week, remember, your power lies within you. Let it loose.